In this unit, we're going to take a look at some of the peoples on the edges of the old kingdoms of Israel and Judah, as well as Mesopotamia and Egypt. We're going to fill in a couple of blanks here, especially because each one of them has a connection to a Western civilization concept that we need to carry forward. And in many ways, we'll sort of sum up some of the developments of this early part of history, and we'll take a look at those as well. In this context, for example, I'm not sure many of us are familiar with who the Phoenicians are, all right? It's not a phrase that rolls off the tongue very easily, and you sometimes wonder, does that mean somebody from Phoenix, Arizona? But what we're going to look at here is that the alphabet that we have in front of us, right? The English alphabet, which is based on one that came before, which one came before. If we go back to the origins of the idea of literacy, we had cuneiform, right? We saw those wedge-shaped pictographs on clay where it almost looked like a sparrow was walking through some mud. If you look inside your text, there's probably some examples of Egyptian hieroglyphs, right, where a depiction of a concept is in a form of pictures. But in each of those cases, there's not a clear delineation of how those symbols can be adapted and used, right, in the sense that we work on an alphabet where we have a letter, for example, A. We know what sound it can make, and whether it is part of the middle of the word or towards the end or the beginning, we have certain clues to understand what kind of sound it's going to make, all right? We owe this very early system of writing to the Phoenicians, people who lived in and around what's today modern-day Lebanon, especially at a city-state called Byblos, right? And later on, the Greeks are going to corrupt the idea of something from Byblos into the idea of book, right? Literacy. So that we have some connections here. What's also interesting is that the Phoenicians are a sea empire, right? Based on several city-states along the coast of Lebanon, they have a large seaborne empire, a large trade empire that eventually is going to stretch from one end of the Mediterranean to the other. They're going to have trade bases all the way to Spain, and we'll be talking about that later. But for now, the key concept is the Phoenicians, instead of having a pictograph system of literacy, are creating a system of symbols, which over time will morph and change, but a symbol is going to equal a sound. And that means that many other languages can use this system to make a sound in their own language, all right? So that one of the key developments of the Phoenicians is this very simple platform. We will, of course, later on in the English language add letters. For example, later on we'll add the letter J or we'll add the letter W. But nonetheless, we will take this base system from the Phoenicians and we'll adopt it and use it over time. It will be the platform that the Greeks will use later on when they create their alphabet system. It's the same system the Romans will use when they also try to create their own Latin alphabet. So the origins of this idea are not the pictographs that we saw, for example, in cuneiform or in Egypt. These are more the ideas of a symbol equals a sound. It offers a lot more flexibility and will be much more adaptable to different cultures. Also, what's going to be interesting about the Phoenicians is that they're going to have a very large trade network, and they're going to grow relatively wealthy. And even though in time they are kind of squeezed out by the military forces around them in the Middle East, around Lebanon, they are going to carry their civilization to many other places across the Mediterranean Sea, and like I said, all the way to Spain. And later on, we're going to encounter this Phoenician society again as they become one of the early trade empires that will be going to war with the Roman Empire in a couple of chapters. But the origins of these people are in the area of what you know as modern-day Lebanon, in and around the city of Byblos and Tyre, and they, as part of their seaborne empire, branch out. And wherever they go, using the model of cultural borrowing, wherever they go, they bring with them their religious concepts, their concepts of trade, and their concepts of an alphabet. And we'll see these popping up other places in and across the Mediterranean. Another note here, the Assyrians, who had been just the latest successor state in Mesopotamia, the one that had gotten to the point where they had conquered the previous group, the Chaldeans, who had all right, I'm going to leave it to your textbook to walk you through the various successor kingdoms and who did what when. And I know it can be partially confusing, but the idea there is to take a look at this area as extremely unstable and also militarily aggressive. But also with that, remember, goes the idea of cultural borrowing. This offers more opportunities for more people to exchange ideas and concepts. But when the Assyrians came in, when they took Judah, for example, and destroyed the city of Jerusalem and took away the people who were there called the Hebrews from Judah, they took them back to Babylon. And in the next successor kingdom, there's going to be a change of policy. As you recall, the Assyrians, in many ways, in a very basic level, had operated as terrorists. They had tried to terrorize, scare the populations around them that they were at war, when they were at war with them, and tried to intimidate them out of actual resistance. So the idea of a brutality, there are stories of the Assyrians taking a city-state that had defied them and then doing all kinds of cruel things to the people who lived there and then displaying what they had done to the next city-state as a warning. We'll take that at face value as simply a terroristic state, but also one that was relatively intolerant of resistance, if I can put it that way. So that if somebody afterwards comes along and does conquer the same territory and then adopts a different kind of ideology, we're going to understand why. That's why we're going to spend some time talking about the rise of the Persians. All right? They are the next successor in this whole area of Mesopotamia. So let's start there for a second. The people of Judah have been taken to live in Babylon as slaves. They are there under the control and the brutality of their masters. In the process, Cyrus the Great, who had helped organize the Medes and other Persians into a more identified and successful military group, comes in and eventually, by the time period that we're talking now, by roughly the time period of 539 BCE, has conquered and taken over much of the Mesopotamian Empire, taken it from the people who had it before, and has also now gotten his empire to the edge of the old kingdom of Judah. Question. If I have an unstable frontier in and around the city of Jerusalem, and I have the people who used to live there who are living as slaves in Babylon in my kingdom, could it possibly work that I could take these people who are already my slaves and take them and remove them from where I am in Babylon and send them back to their homeland? And could I do that in such a way that they would be inspired to not only obey me, but also pay me my taxes and not cause me trouble? Now, it's a very simple idea, and it's not unusual. Cyrus the Great is one of the first major politicians who simply is looking at what he wants as a leader, right? Think about this. And this is kind of a timeless concept, and we'll see it come up other places. If I'm king, I want people to pay my taxes. All right. I also want them to obey me so they don't have to fight about getting taxes. I don't have to send extra military forces to control you. I really want you to pay. I really want you to obey. And in the case of many Mesopotamian leaders and others, they also had insisted on some sort of religious uniformity, some sort of control of people's local cultures and economics and religion. What if, and this is maybe a what if Cyrus could think in terms of I want them to pay, I want them to obey, and I really don't want to worry about the other contexts, all right? Because as a politician, what if I want them to pay and I want them to obey, and I enforce my religious ideas on them, and I jeopardize getting the first two things I really wanted? All right? Should I settle for the first two and let the third one just go? Now, this does not mean that Cyrus is going to believe that all religious faiths are equal. He is not going to believe that they are all the same thing under a different guise or a different organization, calling something six when it's actually a half dozen. It's not that kind of concept. He believes and seems to believe that he is a deeply devout Zoroastrian, and we'll talk about that in a second, but also he believes as a politician, if you look at what he does, he may not put a sign up on the wall that says, I want to separate my political from my religious part of my rule, but it certainly is tempting to see it that way. It's tempting to see that as the origins, not of a true toleration, but simply the idea that if I'm a politician, I'm ruling a large empire, and I really want people to pay, and I really want them to obey, If I go for the third thing, maybe I'll lose the first two. All right. Now, Cyrus is in charge. He sends the people from Babylon back to their kingdom in Judah. He maintains control in and around the city of Jerusalem. He's not freeing them, right? But he is going to use them. They are going to pay his taxes and obey him. Okay? Now that they have done that, and he is starting to separate out the concept of his religious faith from his political activities and military, let's take a look at one of the origins of how he could have done that. In the time period about 660 BCE, in Persia, there is a holy man, a mystic, a priest, who his name is Zoroaster. And he is going to found an idea of what's called Zoroastrianism as a religious faith. And it's interesting to take a look at for a second because remember, we outlined a couple of quick ideas about Egyptian belief with their Book of the Dead and their Judgment Day, right? And we have within the Mesopotamian context the ideas of the Epic of Gilgamesh, the pursuit of immortality. Zoroastrian belief is going to have some aspects that are going to add to the complexity of the different religious ideas. And even though there's not an equation where this is here and it shows up over here, it is intriguing to take a look at for a second, especially because, remember, we are looking at the emergence of some significant religious beliefs amongst the Hebrew peoples, right? Who now that they have gone from Babylon back to Judah are going to be referred to as the Jews, all right? The Zoroastrian belief that was very powerful in the time of Cyrus the Great, okay? Cyrus the Great also had other gods and goddesses that were around him, and there's a lot of different religious belief. And he started to think in terms of if he just strictly obeyed his religious priests, he would then be intolerant. He would use every effort possible to exterminate and undermine other religious faiths. He chooses not to do that. Instead, I would say, from my perception, he is doing the pay and obey that I laid out earlier. He wants people to pay and obey. Here's the other interesting thing about Zoroastrianism. It's powerful in the area in and around the time period when the Jews are in Babylon. And some of the concepts within Zoroastrianism are intriguing. For example, it's moving towards monotheism. It had been polytheistic, like Hebrew belief as well. It also is interesting because Zoroastrian belief is going to emphasize a concept that we're going to call free will. Okay? It's the idea that an individual chooses within Zoroastrian belief the way of truth and light and goodness that will lead to a reward. Or you can choose the path of darkness and evil that will lead you to a very different evil life. And sometimes this is going to be later on depicted as what's going to be called moral dualism. That somehow they're going to simplify this down to the idea that the earth is divided into black and white, right? And that the black and white are constantly in struggle with each other. It's like a circle with a black side and a white side. One is good and one is evil, and they constantly fight each other. That concept of moral dualism is within Zoroastrianism. So is the concept of free will. But there's also the idea of Judgment Day, of the end time, of the apocalypse, where people will be held accountable for whether they followed the path of righteousness and truth and goodness and light, or if they went the way of darkness and evil. And inside those very simple ideas are some profound religious concepts that will be in many places showing up in other terms, in other explanations. But remember, the Hebrew people are still, as now they've been held hostage in Babylon, they're still formulating their monotheism. They're still looking to the development of their scriptures, and they're surrounded by lots of Zoroastrian belief that is reinforcing the concepts of free will, that the earth is a playground for good and evil, and that there is, in many ways, human choice, whether you wish to choose to go the good or the bad way. There's some intriguing ideas there. We'll be looking at them again as we move forward in other aspects of Western civilization. But remember, go back into your reading, make sure you have a close understanding of some of these concepts and ideas, and do take a look at some of those practice test questions.